Hello and welcome to the Studio 2.0, aka my apartment. So today we're going to be working on this 3D printer and we're going to be trying some new video styles since I actually have a cameraman this time who is of course behind the camera right now. Alright, so with this thing I want to make quite a few modifications to it. So first off, I want to get all of the limit switches properly wired and working because right now this thing is kind of a pain in the butt to use without these guys because you cannot home it automatically. You have to do everything by hand. So I'm going to be adding this limit switch to the Z-axis and then properly wiring the other two axes. Another thing that I need to fix is the frame got a little bit tweaked on the way up here, so I'm going to have to straighten that out. I'm going to print out a mounting bracket for the power supply so I don't have these exposed wires hanging out. Just generally managing all of the cables on this thing is going to be a very important step as well, trying to make this look presentable because my roommates are nice enough to let me store this thing in the living room. And another issue that I found when I moved this guy up here was that the main power input block on this is slightly brown and charred, and it's not supposed to look like that. So we're just going to remove that and solder the power wire straight onto the board. I started my adventure in 3D printer restoration by attempting to straighten out the frame. This seemed like it worked alright, but it ended up causing issues later when trying to actually use this thing to print. I'm still not entirely sure why, but the wing nuts on the bottom of the build plate started to catch on the frame of the printer. I later solved this problem by realigning pretty much everything on the Y-axis and making sure everything was as straight and as even as it could be. Next, I designed and printed a new cover for the power supply. Now this was completely unintentional, but the cover for the power supply ended up looking a lot like the front of a Jeep. The two big circular holes were cut to allow wires through, and these slots were there for airflow. Next, I took off the control board and removed all the wiring from it. As you can probably tell, the burning on that connector got much worse after I decided to print out this piece before attempting to repair it. So it definitely would have been a good idea to fix the power delivery before attempting to print anymore with it. But anyway, it ended up working out and it didn't completely catch on fire, so I guess that's a good thing. To fix this issue, I went ahead and completely removed that power input terminal block and soldered wires straight onto the PCB. And once I did that, I decided to put a little blob of hot glue over those wires just to give them a little bit of strain relief. After this, I went ahead and disassembled the old power supply setup. The setup included a power supply for the Raspberry Pi as well as a solid-state relay that could be controlled from the Raspberry Pi through a web interface in order to turn the printer on and off. Next, I put on a new piece of white LED strip. I wanted to replace the old one because it was kind of a nasty, cold white color, and it also wasn't very bright, so I put a better piece of LED strip on it. After this was complete, I went ahead and started the rewiring process. I started this from the power supply by getting the new cover mounted. I added two switches on this cover. The first switch was the rocker switch, which controls the incoming power to the power supply of the printer, and that second smaller toggle switch turns on and off the LED strip. Once this was done, I went ahead and just slid this cover over the power supply, and it just works as a friction fit over the power supply. After all of this, I was still left with a complete mess of wires and a non-functioning printer. Alright, so it's been a few weeks since I've gotten this thing completed. All in all, we spent probably about a week getting this thing up to where it is now. So we've done what we've set out to do. We have cable managed this machine about as well as we can. Unfortunately, some things like the X-axis motor can't be perfectly cable managed because all this has to be able to move around. But anyway, this stuff is just cable loom that's meant for automotive applications. I do have a couple of complaints about this cable loom stuff. I bought it from Walmart. It was cheap, but it's not the greatest stuff ever. For one thing, I had to cut my own slit in this stuff in order to get this around the cables, which usually that comes pre-cut. Another thing is this stuff is really stiff. So especially like on the Y-axis, the bed plate where this moves back and forth, this really doesn't have a lot of give to it and the cable just kind of stays in one spot. So I'm not real sure how well that's actually working for strain relief, which is kind of the purpose of having something like this on here. I may end up having to replace at least this section with some other form of cable management, but for now it's okay. So I didn't record this, but I did go ahead and pretty much realign everything on this Y-axis so that it was all straight and as perfect as I could possibly make it. Another major thing that happened to this was the power supply mounting. So I added a nice power supply mount to this machine, which is something that I've never had on this before. I usually just laid the power supply on the desk by the machine. And on the mount for the power supply, I just added a hardware power switch. This just turns on and off the 120 volt AC power coming into the machine. And this other smaller switch turns the LED strip up here on and off. For right now, this power supply mount's just hot glued onto the frame of the printer. I may change that in the future if it becomes an issue, but for right now it's holding on and it seems to be just fine. And the power supply itself is just a friction fit into this mount, so I don't have anything actually holding this in besides gravity and friction. On the back of the machine, you can see some of the cable management that we did to this. This was probably the most time-consuming part, just running all of these wires and trying to make it look nice, because as you can see from the videos that we showed before, this thing was an absolute mess before I started messing with this stuff. Right now, I think it looks pretty good. We don't have an absolute mess of wires going everywhere, which was kind of the goal of this whole project. And last but certainly not least, after 4 years of owning this machine, I have finally wired the limit switches. So I did previously have the X-axis and the Y-axis limit switches mounted on the machine. However, they were not hooked up to anything because I was having major issues when I first built this thing with those limit switches, so I just decided not to use them. I did not have a X-axis switch mounted before, so I went ahead and added one of those. The mounting system for that X-axis switch is pretty bad. It's a bunch of cut up 3D printed plastic that I had laying around and some hot glue to hold the switch in place. But it works. I don't think it's going to go anywhere anytime soon, so I'm not too worried about that. And with all that done, this machine is finally able to home itself, which is something that it's never been able to do before. Since getting this thing finished, I've managed to do something that I haven't done in a very long time, and that was to print a nearly perfect 3D Benchy. Usually this machine struggles with the bow of the boat, and it actually managed to print one of these very, very nicely recently. The only thing is, these have been multiplying and randomly showing up all over in our apartment, so we're not really sure what's going on with that. Other than that, if you want to see the stuff that I make with this printer, go ahead and click on that subscribe button. If you like this video, go ahead and click on the like button. If you have any comments on how this video is produced, go ahead and leave those down below, because this is kind of a new style for us. I actually have a cameraman and a secondary editor now, so hopefully I will be able to produce more content. Of course, I'm in college right now, and the time that I have is kind of limited to produce these videos, but I'm hoping to start making more of them. But anyway, that's about it for now, guys. Bye. Hey Brent, come look at this. What is it? What?
Wait. They're just... What?